with a
Uh.
voice. Power.
Oh, streaming live. Are we live now?
Yeah.
2 seconds. I don't think it's fully there yet.
Did you send out a little thing on IG?
I will in just a sec.
Oh, let me turn it off. What is this?
Is my
background?
Is my background noise? Is it a little loud?
Why do you do this? Why are you this way?
Intro music?
Oh yeah, I was trying to set a vibe. I'm sorry,
Okay.
like something a little Cialis-y to really paint the picture.
Perfect.
Yeah, let's see.
Kick us off, Erwin. Let's do this.
Are we ready?
Let's do it.
Awesome. Welcome back to another episode of Brandbeats. Again, we are just continuing the conversation around, honestly, the current cultural zeitgeist and the current atmosphere outside. And just in case there's new people tuning in, if you're not tuning into the live, but you're listening to this afterwards, if there's new people, what we've been doing is having weekly conversations, even though Brandbeats used to be a monthly podcast centered around culture. We transitioned to weekly dialogue because there's just so much happening. And internally, we have a lot of different people, a lot of different faces, and a lot of different voices. And we wanted to provide a space weekly for those voices to be heard, to share our experiences, to share how we're feeling about the current evolution of society, people, and culture as it happens in real time. And so every single episode, we've had new people. You will recognize some of the same voices. Me, Erwin, we have JoJo, we have Eric as some of our constants. Andrew, I don't know where that man is. He used to be a constant.
He's on vacation.
I know. I'm just throwing shade. He's on vacation. I was gonna joke and say he don't care about the culture. No, he's on vacation. But we have two new faces, and maybe we can just do a quick introduction. So I'll toss it to Sohail, and then we can also have Brian introduce himself, and then after that, JoJo's gonna give you an intro into what we're talking about today.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Sohail Koilo, and I'm a healer, teacher, coach, consultant, and I've been working with Basic for like 1.5 years now. I'm stoked to be here.
Stoked to have you.
So glad.
I'm Brian. I'm an ACD at Basic, up north in Mountain View. Super excited to be on this. This is actually one of the first things that exposed me to Basic, just the podcast. So being on this is pretty cool. Super excited to chat with y'all.
That's crazy. So you were introduced to Basic through our rambling and our rants? Is that what you're saying?
Partially, yeah. It was like that, and then also the culture site, and doing some digging and listening. Yeah, definitely.
I'm happy it was balanced by some like dope work in a culture site, not just like these dudes just crazy.
Who are these people? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And now JoJo's gonna like throw down on a beautiful transition from last week.
No, first of all, also we have another person joining us, Jody. She's running a little bit late, but Jody also works with us at Basic. And I just think that the base of our conversation is going to be around, heart healing. Last week, we kind of talked about therapy and how we kind of maneuver during this time and keeping our peace and finding our peace. And we are lucky to have someone like Sohail who works with us, who kind of brings it always back to our heart and ourself. And I think it's amazing, or at least I think it's an opportunity for us to share kind of what we do internally, externally with you guys, to continue that journey of finding our peace, but fighting the good fight. I know personally, I probably would have had a meltdown a long time ago if it wasn't for him. But just the conversations that we have that keeps it so real and so honest, that allows me to continue to speak my truth and go upon my own journey and know that we have the support of this collectiveness team.
Hell yeah. I mean, I'll just say that I have, like, the conversations that I've had with a lot of you, who, especially who've gone through my leadership mastery program, you know, it's not just about like how you lead, it's about understanding your power and your pain, and the recognition that both have a role in life, power and pain. Because if we don't recognize our pain and how it plays out, and we don't harness our power, then we're not fully inhabiting the world. And so the gift for me has been working with so many of you who are so willing to step into that space and be like, yeah, let me look at that pain, because if I don't, it's gonna fuck with me at some point. And to be honest and brave and stand in front of it and say, that pain is just a part of me that needs a hell a lot of love from me. And that your willingness to show up for that has been amazing for me.
Thanks, Sahel.
Yeah.
Oh, shucks. So jumping in, I mean, is there something that someone just immediately wants to talk about? Again, I know we talked about self-healing. I think we're kind of basing this around identity. You know, how do people feel at this very moment, at this time? Last year we talked about Kanye running for president. He's not. So
Or is he? I think he reversed that.
I feel like we did our job. people can thank us. You're welcome. Made way for it made way for the Give Me My Money party. Again, we're gonna run not 2020, obviously, that time has passed. Next cycle, we're up.
We're gonna run for a Give Me My Money party.
Jojo, I would definitely vote for you. Let's just make that clear. I would definitely. You have my support.
You know, I'll come and fuck shit up as I do best.
Yeah, we need that. We need that right now.
But no, is there anything you guys kind of want to jump off and discuss?
I mean, you had thrown out the word heart work,
Yeah.
right? And for me, that's like some of the most important thing. I feel like right now we're a very mental culture. We value the mind, how everyone thinks, and the mind has limitations. And so I think this time, which for me is probably one of the most profound moments of human evolution that I think we're experiencing. Like, we're literally sitting in the middle of legit evolution of the human species.
Yeah.
Right? And that evolution isn't a mental game. The mind has a role in it, but it's so much about the heart. And so I don't know, I'd be curious about, like, what you guys are doing to feel like you're tending to your heart or connecting to your heart, or how do you stay close to it? Because we need that right now more than ever.
Brian, I feel like you should talk. We hear enough from Erwin.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think, being aware of like what's going on is like super important, and processing, how that affects you personally. It's just something that I feel like a lot more people can do. It's very easy, especially, for like, men in America, to kind of ignore their feelings, kind of push that stuff to the side. But with all the things that are happening around like the pandemic, social injustice, and just this overall like past crazy 4 years that we've been living under, in terms of like, the way Americans have been going, it's important to kind of acknowledge that and kind of recognize how that might be affecting you. I've read like things where it seems like overall most of the American population is definitely suffering from like stress and anxiety, just from the past few years. And I feel like this is that point where a lot of it's coming to apex. So I definitely think it's super important now for people to, at least now more than ever, to really acknowledge that and take steps to really try to fix that or try to, you know, recognize that and see how they can move forward. How's that?
Fantastic.
It's
Well
not
said.
a quiz, bro. I think
No, but
each
I
one of
mean,
us
for real
have
though,
our-
yeah.
Because you actually brought up the point about identity, and I think each
Mhm.
one of us are gonna have our own unique answers because we're all unique, special snowflakes and flowers in this world. Because this is like a constant conversation, like being a Black man in America, and especially during this time, there's like definitely a ridiculous amount of mental strain and mental pressure, because you're like, the perception is you can't back away and you can't take a step back, or else then you like look like you're giving up on your own people and on your own culture and on your own movement that's like started and sparked with your people, and like turning a blind eye to all of the pain and all of that stuff. And not saying that I've had the desire to, but it's like there is that like thing in the back of your head, right? So there's that mental pressure, and then or societal pressure and like cultural pressure. It's the same as like if you were to say, "Hey, I didn't like Black Panther." It's like you can't say those things, you can't do those things, you can't step away. I'm playing, JoJo. I was using that as an example, just a lighter example, but I think for me, there's definitely been a balancing during this time. We have COVID, not being able to leave, kind of being stuck and like bombarded and like constantly inundated with this information. That has definitely made it more stressful, but finding those pockets and moments to breathe, which I still haven't found. I want to, but I keep on adding more things to my docket and to my involvement, right? So I realized early that I'm at an age where I'm scared to go protest. And even when I drove down and like was driving through downtown San Diego and saw a protest, my emotions like legit took over. And like I was about to tear up, and I like really, really, really got deeply emotional. And I realized I'm not in a space where I can actually go protest, because I don't know what I will do. I felt like I would be paralyzed. I didn't know how I would handle my emotions, because I like saw the cops and immediately got terrified. And so I was like, oh yeah, I'm not in a mental space to be out here protesting. And so then it was like me trying to figure out like, what do I do and how can I contribute? And that was like all of the first weekend. And then for me, it was I started making shirts, and that became my way of like mentally healing and like finding mental space and creating space for conversation, at least for myself. And it allowed me to like,
talk about your contribution, which is amazing.
Yeah, can we like acknowledge Erwin's amazing, you know, yeah.
Like,
no,
we should hype you up, because what you did was amazing. Like you
incredible.
By yourself literally made these shirts that started a conversation, not only with people in like low places, but high places too. You know what I mean? I feel like what you've done was like make money that went back to us. You could have kept it because it was under you. You know what I mean? But you donated this large amount of money to a bunch of funds to kind of continue the conversation, not only continue the conversation, but contribute to the cause. And it wasn't just like, hey, I have these talking pieces t-shirts. You're like, I'm actually putting movement behind it, which to me means way more than just like having some kind of cultural trend. Because what we talk about a lot internally is like, we don't want this to be a trend. We want to make sure that this makes an impact. And I think what you did made a huge impact. So no, you don't have to be out there, you know what I mean, in protests. I agree. Like, I don't want to be out there in protests, because I'll get locked up. I know that. So I'm trying to find other ways to contribute that will make an everlasting impression, whether it's like with colleagues, with friends, or just a network of people that can entrust that I know what I'm doing, or at least I'm trying to like lead.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think that's where I was like going with it, is like, there was an amazing post that helped me understand that we didn't have to occupy every single lane of the highway. Absolutely. During this time when everybody is running. We need to all occupy what we can, whether that's literally just learning and unlearning things, or if it's like marching and protesting, or if it's like fighting for policy change, or if it's doing this or that. We don't have to occupy everything, but we can like function in the way that is truest to who we are and ourselves, that also creates space for healing as well.
Well, I think that's really huge because like the parallel, if you think about in like the healing spaces, there's traditionally like there were healers who would serve exactly as that. Like that was their role in society. Like they would be the healer. But I think this time isn't like the healer archetype doesn't just have to heal. Like they can bring it into the boardroom, they can bring it to the tennis court, they can bring it to the basketball court, they can bring it into all these new places. So us bringing light where light doesn't normally go, I think that's the power of this time. So the recognition of how we can serve, how we support is as important as the recognition of what we need in order to heal, in order to serve and support better. Like both are true.
Mm-hmm.
To your point, Erwin, and I'm glad Jody joined, because Jody has been one of my like positive outlets when it comes to like, when we talked last time too, I was like, oh, I don't need a therapist because I was made for this. I think having people in your corner that understands who you are, but also champions your own peace and like tries to find more healthier ways to be like, I hear you, I respect you, I understand what you're trying to do, but like, also let's find out ways to make it a lot more easier. And so having people like Sohail and Jody, and it's just me speaking on my own personal experiences, it actually brings in this light to myself as someone who feels like I have to carry a lot of weight, emotional baggage on my back because I have this voice that is heard outside of anyone else. You know, I have a privilege that my voice is more heard than my counterparts or people who I feel like go through similar experiences. And to carry that weight is a lot because I don't feel like I can pass the baton on to anyone. I feel like this is my job. But having champions like people like you, someone who I can talk to, someone who can provide me feedback, whether I don't necessarily say it has to be come from a therapist, but just period, anyone that can make you feel better about like taking those moments to reflect and do something that can slowly bring things off of your shoulders, I think is important.
I think the thing that struck me the most, Jojo, is, well, not the most, it just struck me hard, saying, I'm made for this. And you were talking about your strength, and it's something I've been reckoning with myself for a long time, is, you know, being strong and being made for this type of energy and work doesn't mean that it isn't hard, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't take a toll, and it doesn't mean that you're always down, right? Like, and I think there's in our society there's often this, I don't know, compulsion or pressure or reward even for being strong.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a trap, right? I mean, it has been for me anyway. And so that really struck me when you said that. It's like, yeah, I don't know. I just feel like we all need to let each other know that we don't always have to be strong. And that is also admirable to be able to acknowledge that.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah, Erwin, take a break. But no, that's a great point. You know, it's like, it's easy to kind of lose sight of, you know, what your, I guess, you know, inner world, I like that phrase, you know, really needs. And sometimes you kind of need to recharge that every now and then. Because yeah, this stuff can be draining.
When it comes to like what our society is, and we're very like, our attention span is really short, right? So as I think as a Black person, I think we understand that our window is like really fucking small. And so we're just trying to jam pack as much as we can, whether it's like exhausting or not. I'm like, oh my God, in like 2 weeks, because sports is starting to come back out and like, you know, people are starting to go back outside, like people are going to start losing track, which they did with Breonna Taylor. Like she's no longer trending. It's like the feeling of defeat if all what we've done and contribute isn't enough to make a change. And so we just feel like we have to constantly like beat this into people's heads or constantly put this out there. And it is exhausting in some points, but at the same time, that exhaustion actually kind of, for me, like gives me the strength to keep going, because I'm like, my ancestors did this. Like they got hosed, they got attacked by dogs, they were actually getting beaten by police, and I haven't had that to me. Not saying that like my feelings aren't valid, but just to know that for something so small, which is literally just maybe even fire some police, you know what I mean, just to get a little bit of justice, takes having these conversations, takes making social posts, or takes doing whatever it takes, you know what I mean, like to inflict some kind of justice. That's why it's like I feel like I'm built for it, because I'm not tired yet. Like I feel like I have to, because in a month or two, this conversation will be done.
There's something really interesting about that. One, I love that you're not tired, and you're like, yes, if the window is open right now, or the door is open right now, pour everything through it, because historically we see that it closes. And also kind of still going on that idea of tangential to it's okay to not always be strong, is it's okay to delegate, right? Like which I mean, this isn't yours to carry alone, right? I don't know. I read a really solid post that gave me a lot of pause and a lot to think about, which is like, this isn't a Black person's problem to solve. This is a white person's problem to solve, and right. And that just, that idea of how much work you feel like you are willing and ready and doing, and also, I don't know, I'm not sure what else to say.
Well,
it seems like we're talking. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, and I was gonna throw it to you actually. It seems like we're talking a lot about, what we're thinking currently, how we're feeling, and this might be a super, I guess, like philosophical question, but we talk about the mind and the heart. So I guess, Sohail, how would you differentiate the two, and what are kind of the two almost like implications of both, would you say?
The way I like to kind of think about it is, so the mind is always needs a frame of reference to understand something. So like, when you meet someone, immediately you're like, oh, that person reminds me of blah, blah, blah. Or you go to some place and you're like, oh, this place reminds me of that place I've been to. So the mind is always looking for a frame of reference to understand a current situation based on historical experience. So and it's because there's an efficient pathway. So it's always looking for the quickest way to understand something. And so what the mind will do very easily is basically make any situation, no matter how new or unique or fresh it is, to resemble a situation that you've experienced before. And if it's connected to any kind of trauma in you, it'll make it a story. So it'll reinforce a story that you have in you around whatever that trauma is. Oh, I'm not seen, I'm always looked over, I'm not loved, I'm not capable of love, all these things. So the mind is always comparing something to something else in order to understand it. So if the mind looks at this time, maybe it'll say, oh, this reminds me of like the civil rights movement in the 60s, but it's just basically that. Or it'll just put it to smaller movements in the past decade or two decades, and we'll wait for the next moment when it just closes again. But the heart, and then I don't mean the beating apparatus, but there's an energetic center, there's an emotional center. And I think the way I see the heart is the center that can perceive and feel something that is inherent in a given moment, but maybe you haven't seen or known before. Like you can just feel that the state you're in right now or something that's happening is just different. The mind will be like, oh, this looks like yesterday, or this looks like the day before, that last movement. Right. But the heart, if you tap into it purely, it'll tell you, wait, there's actually something unique and different and special about what's happening in this moment right now. And that goes for large moments like what we're in the middle of, but it also goes for small encounters. Like if you're just hanging out with a person, a brand new person that you meet, the mind within a few seconds is going to be like, oh, this person reminds me of blah, 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 based on their color and the way they speak and the way they are, that they're probably this kind of person. The mind is going to find these really fast pathways to basically categorize who that person is, what they're all about. You'll make a whole story and then you'll be done. Right? The heart will be like, no, fuck that. Let me open a space, like a warm, comfortable blanket for this person to step into, and let me just allow them to reveal me to me, to reveal themselves to me. So the heart is more patient. The heart is more open. The heart is like, I know there's something special in this human that my mind can't see right now. And so I'm waiting to feel it, to see it, to recognize it. And when I do, then I know I'm in the presence of magic. And that's the distinction. That's why the heart is so important, because the heart is going to feel something right now. It's going to recognize something right now in this encounter we're having in just the six of us. The heart knows that we're engaging in a fusion of thought, feelings, and ideas that maybe the mind is like, well, I've been doing this, every week, every Friday for the last few Fridays, but the heart can possibly recognize that there's just something unique here. And that is what I think will take us into a whole new dialogue and a whole new space, is the recognition of that which is something special happening in a given moment.
That's super, super poignant. And it makes me think, as far as the mind goes, we talked about this, I think it might have been 3 episodes ago, I can't recall, but we talked about how as humans, our natural inclination is to fit other people into these patterns and heuristics and, just like our kind of preconceived notions. So it's interesting that, Sohail, you say there's kind of a clash between that, but almost like our intuition and things that challenge that. So to me, this like conflict between mind and heart and like, intuition versus kind of patterns and data and things like that. I don't have like an opinion or anything, but I just an observation. I think it's super interesting.
Well, yeah, and I think like Urban and the D&I collective, the way we've been talking so much around the power of conversation, right? The power of dialogue for this time. We don't have to be too quick to arrive at definitions and solutions and answers. Let's just play in the gray space of conversation. And what enables us to play in the gray space of conversation, I think, is the heart, because the heart isn't looking to deconstruct a situation and find that they like come up with a quick answer. The heart's like, yeah, let's play. Like the heart has love. Love is an adhesive. Love brings things together. The mind deconstructs, it breaks apart, it breaks everything into its individual pieces in order to understand it. So there's a very important distinction between the utility of those two centers. And we've been in the mind, which is sever, break, separate in order to understand me, individual I, and the heart is like, well, no, we. So, which is why this time, kind of playing off, Jody, what you were saying around like whose responsibility this is. If you think about the history, we've identified individuals who have had significant change in the world. It's a story of individuals. But what if the next chapter is actually not a story of individuals? It's actually the story of collectives. It's of the we coming together in order to affect change. And that's the realm of the heart.
Totally.
I've wrestled with it not nearly so insightfully or eloquently, but this the whole time you're talking, I just want to be like snapping and
yeah, amazing. So good.
For a while now, I've been thinking about like mind and heart challenging each other. Like, but can we? You know, my mind keeps telling me as I go in circles around it. What you just said there gave me chills, and that's a very like heart centric.
Mm-hmm.
Like it resonates immediately. Like yes, of course, right? I mean that, and then the mind kicks in, and I get into human nature and all I've ever read of it, and all I have ever thought perhaps that I have ultimately experienced of it. And that's not entirely true, because I wouldn't say that that's all I've ever experienced of it. But thinking about society and government, and we've not seen a we model.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
And so it is at once exciting because it means it hasn't been tried and failed, but also remarkably difficult to conceive of.
Absolutely. I think that's beautifully put, because also you think about the last several thousands years of human evolution, right? We, in our tribal dynamics, have basically been trying to kill each other, control each other, exert power over each other. And so it's literally like there is a wound, there is like a tear in our energetic, in our hearts, that is the tear of betrayal. Like we have betrayed each other in the name of tribal dynamics for a very long time. And you think about epigenetics, where trauma is passed from generation to generation, right? And so you think about all of that pain that we're all holding and walking around with, and now we're all trying to kind of come together and do something that has never happened before, which is we're all actually trying to advocate for each other. Like Jojo uses the word uplift, which I think is one of my favorite words, is we're actually all trying not just to get along, but actually to uplift each other. And you're right, like that's never fucking happened before in human civilization. Like we have been trying to kill each other for far longer than we've been trying to be friends with each other. So this is very new territory. And if we feel like we're freaking feeling around in the dark, being like, where's the light switch? That's totally normal, because this hasn't happened before.
Yeah, I think, you touched upon something about, how it's been kind of through history. Or yeah, when we were first as a species starting to evolve, it was all about like, just making sure, you have enough to eat. But that's sort of what makes me hopeful, the way we've been kind of evolving as a society, as a culture. It's been shown that the more you kind of take care of your people and make sure everyone's like fed and has access to basic necessities, the more innovation comes out of that, the more this sort of like mindset of like taking care of like the mass instead of the individual seems to come to the surface. And there's always going to be a lot of people who try to undo that progress or try to hold that stuff down. But yeah, we are at this really interesting point where it seems like everyone is in this together, especially since we're all kind of experiencing, I mean, we're lucky we haven't been experiencing too much of the economic hits of like the pandemic, but people are struggling right now.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone's upset, everyone's dealing with this stuff. They see this stuff in the news and they're kind of banding together because they realize at the end of the day, we're all just human. We're all in this together. This virus can affect you the same way it affects me. Why can't police brutality also affect me the way it affects you?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I like to be hopeful about that kind of stuff. And, it has been giving me more energy in that regard, in terms of seeing what people are doing, how people are being more active, taking initiative, the stuff that Erwin was doing that we were talking about. It's inspiring to see. And yeah, hopefully we just keep moving forward and towards this path of progress, because I can't really see us going backwards now,
Yeah. I mean, should we talk about hope?
Totally.
I mean, you're probably going to make me cry, but all right.
I'm a huge fan of crying, so I
Yeah.
think everyone should feel free to,
Yeah, this is a safe space.
yeah, let it flow, let it go.
Yeah, I think we should dive into definitely this idea of hope and optimism. And it seems like, especially the past 4 years, there's been this definite, huge like polarization. Call it what you want, culture war or whatever, us versus them kind of thing, where it is this conflict between our minds, what we've seen, and our hearts, right? So I think to me, during this quarantine, at least in my relatively short lifetime, because I'm 26, but it seems like the first time in a while that we've had almost like a near consensus as far as people being outraged and just come together. And to me, I mean, I could be wrong, but I feel like we haven't seen something like that since like 9/11 in this country, So for us to see like people, I mean, this isn't a blanket statement by any means, but people kind of joining hands from the aisle and coming together from both sides, just in terms of standing against what's going on and seeing the obvious injustice. So I definitely think there's some hope. And um, so hell, I think you put it best. I think now is the time for us as a collective to just grow together and unite and really just band together and have a very united future. I think there's something to that we could see in the next few years, hopefully.
If I could say, like, and I think this stems from a lot of my own like childhood culture and point of view, like when I think of like hope, I feel like hope devalues my own personal aspirations. I know we had this conversation about what perfect means, and like perfect to me means that like I have to give up something. And for me to have hope and for me to personally feel like we can come together, it means that I'm gonna have to sacrifice a lot of my own personal like values and opinions and I don't know, like personal just like gains when it comes to like what I see as the perfect world. And for me to say this, I'm assuming that the person next to me is going to have to give up a lot of that too. And so when I think of like hope, it's just I I personally feel like I still have to stand in my own truth and just accept that whoever I'm dealing with or whoever I'm talking to or whoever I surround myself with will accept that or share similar like sentiment because the reality is that I can't get someone who is a like a Trump to have the same hope as me. So I think I struggle with that term. And again, it's just probably because of my upbringing and like what I've seen, but like hope to me still is conforming. It's still kind of accepting, not my own truth, but just the truth of what I'm given.
Oh, that's really, really good. I think I I think there's a really interesting thing around hope not being blind to trauma and truth, right?
Yeah.
There's an old Sufi saying that says, "I put my faith in Allah, but I tie my camel to the post."
Mm.
Right? So I put my faith in God, in the universe, source, whatever you choose as the great organizing principle, but I'm going to tie that shit up to the post because if I don't, it's going to walk away. Right? So there's an element of hope doesn't abandon the realities of what I have to face right now. You know, how I have to stand up for myself, how I have to advocate for myself, what I have to fight for. Hope does not abandon that. Hope says, with that, I still believe.
Mm.
That's interesting because it's interesting. But also kind of the delineation between hope and faith, right? And I haven't thought deeply about this. This is a little off the cuff, but faith, the way I have often perceived it, is a little bit more of that letting go of agency, right? Like I don't have to tie it to the post because I have faith. So I think there's a delineation in what you're saying, which is hope doesn't mean that there's still no action required or that there won't be challenge or outright strife, but hope is perhaps keeping your heart open to the possibility of these things we've never seen before.
Hell yeah, absolutely.
And to be very honest, I like, until you said those things and then we connected hope, I wouldn't have thought about it that way, because I have thought as soon as we brought up hope, I was like, oh, I should button it up because I'm not sure I have a lot. But I
I don't think you should put all, your chips on hope. Like, I definitely think it's a balance. It's like, yeah, hope can keep you moving forward because, it gives you the ability to stop and recognize, progress and all these things, but then you still gotta, put your time and put the work in. Otherwise, stuff like that can be crushed, and that can be devastating to come back from.
Yeah, there's Vincent Harding. Do you guys know him? Well, obviously don't know him. He's passed now. He's like an elder of the civil rights movement, and I just listened to a podcast that he was on maybe 5 years ago, and he wrote this essay called "Is America Possible?" And it's still an open tab, so I haven't fully read it. But there's a huge part of there which is around the need for hope that serves as the sort of foundation of the new world, the foundation of what is possible in America. And again, I think it's really important that we're not abandoned. Like, this is not blind faith, right? This is like, oh, I see the injustice and I see how fucked up the systems are, and I see it, and I believe there's a new world, there's a new expression, there's a new America that's awaiting, and hope draws that one closer and closer. Hope is like the bridge between the old and the new, and that's what we need right now. Is we need more bridges.
I agree with that sentiment, and I also kind of like think that with hope, you also need to believe in fear, because for me, it's like fear of the unknown is making me hopeless in a lot of ways. It's like if I don't accept that things might not go the way that I want it to go, then I'm not gonna be hopeful. I actually think that those kind of go hand in hand, because when I have conversations, me personally, I tailor my conversations to the person that I'm talking to, with the understanding that they might not believe in things that I believe, they might not be open to the things that I'm saying, and understanding that even if I'm giving them a piece of my truth or a piece of my hope, the fear that they might not accept the rest of me is like, okay, but we can move forward on this one accord. And that's me just accepting within all this conversation, is that like, I accept fear too.
Yeah, I think there's a reality there too, which is my ability to show up with hope and or faith and or trust is directly related to how much my hope, faith, and trust has been broken historically.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So, right, if I've had a lot of shitty experiences and I've felt racism, I've felt being oppressed, I've felt feeling small, I've felt feeling powerless, then my ability to show up with a lot of hope, faith, and trust is tough. It's not really going to happen, and that's real, for sure.
Yeah, to expand on that just a little bit, and also like what I've witnessed, right? Even if I myself have not been a target of specific things in my years, and what I have witnessed in the past, and what I am still witnessing and hearing, in a variety of circles, right? It continues to challenge my ability to have hope, and kind of a weird spin a little bit, Jojo, on the idea of fear. As you said that, I kind of took it in a different direction until I listened to you. But thinking about when I tap into what I am hopeful for, my fear is how I believe it will have to come about. And because of what I have witnessed and experienced and continue to witness and experience, the things I hope for have not been modeled yet, don't exist in our society yet. And that means there's a great dismantling, which is the gentlest way I can think to put it, that I believe happens before a great rebuilding. And that makes me fearful.
Yeah.
But also hopeful, because I think that's what's at hand.
I mean, how do you show up with hope and or love if you've had your heart broken, if you've been hurt by, whether it's because of your race, your color, your gender, your orientation, like if you've been hurt by some form of prejudice, how do you heal, and then how do you show back up?
For me, it's, and I don't know how to break it down a little bit easier, but it's like the death of ego. And what I carried for so long, being in a predominant city of Black people and feeling like I come from a sense of privilege, not complete privilege, because I've had my own barriers, but like going from that to a position where I am the only Black person or I am the only Black woman, it's kind of like a death of ego in the sense that I have to come to a level of understanding that to make a change, I need to become relatable. And that to me has kept my strength, because when I talk to people of less privilege of me, with people who aren't as easily swayed or easily understanding, if I can say, of like what society is given us, I feel like I have to be the voice for them a lot of times. And that for me is my inspiration. That's what kind of keeps me going. And I think that's my biggest motivation, is to know that I don't know, that I can be that person.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, I'm brown, an immigrant of Indian origin, and gay. Like, I'm very aware of my otherness when I go into practically any environment. And I lived in Portland for 3 years before I moved to Berlin. And Portland was, I think it's one of like the widest cities in the country.
Yes.
And I would go into like any, like, restaurant, bar, yoga place, gym, whatever, and I'd be basically like the only brown person there. And the thing that woke up in me, and I was 35 when I moved there, was I remember my first day of 4th grade when I had just come to the country. And I remember waiting outside to get on the bus for the very first time in America. And I remember, I remember being terrified. And I remember walking up those stairs and like getting up into the bus and then looking straight back. And it was just full of all white faces. And immediately in me, like, two things got like fully cemented in me. And I just basically like tucked into the first like seat I could see and just like crouched down and hid. And one was that I don't look like this, like everyone else here. And so I will never belong. And the second was I will never resemble that concept of beauty. Like, I will never be that beautiful because I'm not like them. And those beliefs were in me for such a long time, playing in the background. And it didn't even come to the surface until I was 35 in Portland. And those things woke up in me. And I was like, holy shit, I've been carrying this shame around my skin color, my shame around my sexuality, my shame around my otherness. And I had to do so much work to basically pull my entire sense of self out of that mud, clean it out of all of that bullshit that told me I wasn't good enough, like throw all that nonsense away and then shove myself back into my body again. And that is what enables me to show up with a little bit of hope, because I've had to do some like psycho-spiritual, like, you know, power washing.
That hit home to me because I can remember my first day on the bus and I was petrified. And that was just, again, coming from like a Black community to a more like mixed community, whereas predominantly white, and just being like, who am I? You know what I mean? Like I was bullied a lot growing up because I was taught Christianity in some sense, but not really. But then I became Muslim and I became a Black Muslim in the South. And like I was in private school, then became back to public schooling. And that initiation was traumatizing because I was, one, lacking the culture, two, it was around 9/11. And I was just afraid of being me, and proven correctly, being me, wasn't good enough. Even in my own social, like within my own culture, like it wasn't good enough. So when you said that, like that definitely like struck some chord. But me today is still defending that person and understanding those people who didn't accept me.
Yeah. That's the work. That's literally the work. And that's I think is part of the inner responsibility, is us showing up for those parts of us that did get hurt and are probably trapped in some level of trauma within us. Like there are hurt kids inside of us from all those moments where life or people chose not to see us, or chose to see us in a specific way that didn't align with who we were. And that hurts. And we walk around with it. And so part of it is our responsibility, really, to show up and love the fuck out of those parts that are trapped in pain and be like, I got you. That is not happening again, but I got you.
You said earlier, Sohail, the idea of I can't remember the word I was going to say, but we've been walking around betraying one another, right? And when we apply that to this very specific notion, yeah, that happens for most children in lots of different ways, but usually in childhood. And then I think the further betrayal is when we believe it ourselves, right? So it's kind of this dual wound.
Yep.
Because we're too young to even acknowledge that it's coming in from the outside at that time, and then we really, when we accept it and believe it and then feed it more stories, right? I think that's some of the hardest reckoning, is to realize, ooh, this is me talking to me now, not doing it, but like this is me telling myself that that's real.
Yep. We make myth into truth and then we live by it. And then we're all just living in mythology. So, but I took us into a really deep place here. So we can kind of ladder back out into something.
This is all great. This is amazing.
I mean, there is something to, like, the self-identity and kind of moving beyond that, accepting, yourself for who you are, I think allows you to start accepting other people for the way they are too. Like it's very easy I would imagine, if you're the predominant group in a certain area or whatever, there's no real push for you to really change or acknowledge that or acknowledge your faults, because you've just always been accepted the way you are. And I feel like maybe that's the big challenge that some of the people who maybe don't think these issues are important are really trying to undo this sort of progress that's being made. Maybe that's something that they haven't had the opportunity to really face head on because they've never had to.
I totally agree. I think if you have experienced any amount of I don't belong, I'm not welcome, that who I am somehow isn't going to be approved of within this environment, and you have to stay quiet to survive, because that's what it feels like. I have to stay quiet to survive. If you've experienced that in some point in your life, you know how painful that is. And then, yes, in this time, you're going to wake up and you're going to be like, you know what? I don't want that world for anyone, because I understand the pain of it.
To that point, like if you are a person who grew up with privilege your whole life and you're just now coming to that reality, is it excusable for you to go through this stage right now, or just like, hey, this is finally like where I understand, like I can't feel up, like speak up because what I've done my whole life is wrong? Like, is this the time where we excuse that and let people heal or acknowledge or whatever you may call it? Like, where do we kind of push those boundaries, not only within myself, but like with other people? Like, is this the time before where we just be like, fuck all that, and like this is the time you actually need to focus? Is there any point, I don't know, in the time period where we just can't do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think everyone, there's something that a teacher of mine said a long time ago, was that one of the most generous acts of love is allowing someone the gift of their own experience. So yes, you know, people need to have their own experience of awakening into action. And we also can inspire other people to look more deeply and to ask the hard questions and to evaluate their, whether it's privilege or states of ignorance or states of unconsciousness. Ignorance sometimes is a rough word for me. I think unconsciousness is a little bit better, because, well, there's a distinction. Ignorance is willful. Like, I'm choosing not to look at that. Unconsciousness is I've just never had to be around it, and I've kind of existed in a bit of a bubble, and so I've never even thought of it.
Yeah.
And so the unconscious state for me is a little bit more excusable or forgivable. The ignorant state is not. And that's where it's, I think, time to understand where have potentially we all been in some level of ignorance, unconsciousness, and how do we bring more light and more awareness to what we haven't been looking at. That's this time.
Totally. And I think about it in the sense that myself as well, I'm a brown man in this country. I'm an Asian American. And I mean, even for me, there are so many things that, to your point, Sohail, I've been very unconscious about that are like just really starting to come to light, and I'm confronting my own biases and stereotypes and things like that. So I guess just a question for the group: how do you all reconcile your personal identity with your collective identity, like, you know, the groups you represent and things like that? Erwin has some thoughts.
I was gonna say, for me, I don't know if I've ever had to reconcile. For me, there's no reconciling, because there's a certain level of pride that comes from me being a part of a culture that has been so resilient and so powerful. And actually, a lot of the pride in who I am actually comes from me understanding both sides of the story, understanding that there is a pain still felt from slavery, but also seeing how even through all of those moments, there was the ability for my people and my ancestors collectively to rise up and not only create the culture that we all love, but continuously fight for the freedoms that we all enjoy. So for me, like, a lot of my pride actually comes from that. And then even going back to Africa and seeing like the kings and queens of Africa, right? And then there's also a pride that comes from the fact that my family were people who then educated me and taught me about both sides of history. and I was able to have conversations. And I was lucky enough to grow up with like even great grandparents until I was like in like elementary school. So I knew my great grandparents. So I knew people who could actually speak about slavery, right? Or like speak one generation away from slavery. And then my grandma escaped from the South, and like she was actually a mixed child. My grandma on my father's side was a mixed child from the South. So she wasn't accepted by both Black and white. So she had to flee to the North. So I was able to like hear these stories. And then it was also balanced out by, I've talked about this already, by reading books about the great Black inventors and stuff like that. So my perception of myself and my culture was not just what we saw on TV, which was hella one-dimensional, at least when I was growing up, and still is a little bit like shallow. So for me, there isn't a reconciling. There's a beautiful pride in like knowing that my culture is on my back and knowing that I come from a line of like beautiful heritage. And this is not to diminish anybody else's culture. It's literally this, it should be the same for everybody. Like being from a Filipino descent, there's so much pride that comes from that. And I'm just now learning all of that, right? Since my grandma's Filipino, but I didn't grow up with any of that culture, I'm now learning those things. And now there's like an additional element of pride that comes and stems from that. And then also the crossover between a Buffalo soldier and a woman who were like guerrilla soldiers in the Philippines, right? And fighting and engaged in guerrilla warfare. Like there's a certain level of like pride and joy that comes from that. And then my personal identity develops from my own personal experiences, but who I am is an amalgamation of my heritage, legacy, all of those things. And then it's added on to by the personal experiences that I've had to individualize myself within the context of the larger sort of like Black experience in America. And I think the Black experience for me is unique, one, because we live on a huge spectrum. Like because of the whole one drop rule and because of slavery, like you can be any color and still be Black, and you had vastly different experiences than one another. Like me as like I'm not the lightest light skin, but I had a very different experience than somebody who is like one shade darker. And each one of those shades literally has a completely different experience of being in America, right? And so while we all have the same lineage and that same heritage and history that is a source of pride and like amazingness, because Blackness to me is defined by resilience, beauty, power, even through struggle. Each one of us has these individualized experiences that then creates a very unique human that's fully based in an empathetic, the ability to be empathetic to a lot of people, because we never learned our culture. We only learned other people's cultures. And now we're finally able to lean into ours, like wholeheartedly. So I get, in the end, for me, there's no reconciling. There's only pride in the marrying of my personal experiences that are like a kid from the suburbs who grew up in a white community, had to deal with that, but that's all I knew. So therefore, there wasn't like, I didn't necessarily have as much struggle in that realm. My struggles more so came from the inner side of like me thinking I might be needed to act more hood or act more thuggish because the people who didn't look like me accepted me more than the people who did look like me, because I was a suburban Black kid. So that was actually like my source of like struggle and like cultural identity and not really understanding. It also then drove me to go to an HBCU because I was like, yeah, I need to be hyper Black right now. I need to go down to DC, Chocolate City, and like fully engage with my people. And then I just realized that I was playing into the narrative that society wanted me to play into, which is like, there is one definition of Black. And the reality is we live on a spectrum and we are defined by our own experiences. So I guess the reconciling for me actually happened at that moment where I realized I had a beautiful heritage and a shared heritage with all of these people that are on this entire spectrum, but I can still be myself. Yeah.
Amazing.
I mean, yes. Like, yes, all of that. To even slightly build off of that, I think my identity and to go back as far as I could, it's like I grew up with nothing but domestic violence. Like that's all I knew as a child growing up. And it was literally watching men beat women. And for the longest time, that's what I thought Black culture was, because then you see it on TV, you hear about like, you know, Black women being kind of like used as this like tool. And growing up, it's very taboo as a Black woman or as a mother to talk to your child about sex. So what I learned about anything in life was from experience. And I would have to say I didn't know my true identity even growing up as like originally like a Black Christian and like what that means. And that itself is just a whole thing. Like being a Black Christian, I would say it's a complete separate category, just like from Christianity, period. But then trying to embody, you know, my mom going through the changes of becoming Muslim and trying to accept that, and then trying to stay upbeat from going from the Midwest, because I grew up in Chicago and in the South Side Chicago, the projects, from the slums to the suburban life, like Erwin mentioned, and trying to adapt to that. Like, I think a lot of my identity was just adaptation until I got to college. And I, you know, never really crossed my mind growing up in the South, thought to go to like a Black HBCU. I went to art school instead. And I found that experience was the hardest for me because I was then put in this melting pot. I was in San Francisco. So I had never seen interracial relationships. I never, you know, tried to reach out to a Black person who didn't accept me. And through that, I had to, again, create my own identity because I went to public school where Black culture, Black historic value was diminished or demolished, and I didn't know anything about it. Again, I only knew what the bad shit was from being Black. And to coming to this like collective, I found a collective of people who were just like, this is my truth as a Black person. This is how I exude it. And at that moment, I started doing things against what my own self was telling me to do. And I found my own identity, which was like discovering Black art or classifying myself as a Black artist. So when we come to like the truth of identity, I would say like, I don't know. My identity comes from being a Black artist and dived into my own Black experience. And that's my identity. And when we talk about the level of like privilege or like what I'm saying as me as an identifying as a person outwardly is finding myself able to adapt to other people to help them understand, you know, myself. And that's just my own truth. So I, like Erwin says, like me being brown, I'm not dark skinned, I'm not light skinned, but like that was never good enough. But outwardly, I found a collective of people who found it good enough because I live in my own identity, you know? Then that's just considering on top of the things he said. But yeah, I completely agree. Like my identity had to be formed because I don't know where I come from. You know, my history has been demolished. I had to research it. And even in research, it's still very vague and it's still like what is true, what is not true. So when it comes to today and who I stand as myself, I literally had to evolve it. And now as a mother, I'm giving my child the opportunity to explore her own identity, but giving her the at least the lightness, you know what I mean? Like I don't want her to have the darkness that I had to encompass, but giving her the small lightness of my own identity to help her kind of evolve herself.
I love that. I think that that process of formation, you know, like is probably one of the most profound things that we can do as people is how we basically assemble ourselves back again. You know, my experience was more about rejection early on than it was about acceptance. You know, I was raised Catholic, and so I knew the Catholic part of me would reject the gay part of me.
Mm-hmm.
I knew the Indian part of me would reject the gay part of me. I knew the American in me wanted to reject the Indian in me because I didn't want to be different.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then like the spirit kind of spiritual weirdo that was like hiding in me was rejecting the part that was rejecting because that part wanted to just bring everyone together and have us play. So I grew up more through the realm of rejection, of like rejecting all these parts of me, being like, oh, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that, until I became this very like thin sliver of a human that wasn't more than was. And that became a very dark period of time for me, because when you are more not than are, it's like this hollowness, you know, it's like this emptiness. And, you know, that's, I was, you know, what was I was 29 at the time, when I was like, wow, I need to figure out how to fill this sort of empty container that I've become, because I've just rejected so much of me that there's basically nothing left but like a shell. And I took that next decade to basically like repopulate all these parts of me I had discarded, but bring it back in a way that reflected me. I brought the spirit back in a way, like spirituality, but I didn't want to take Catholicism, but I took spirituality in my own way. I didn't want to accept the Indian male archetype of who I needed to be, which was straight, be in business or medicine, make lots of money, and look down upon everyone who doesn't have. Like, I didn't want that. So I had to repurpose what Indian meant for me. So for me, it was like, be nothing for a while, and then accept them all back, but on my terms. So I have actually had a lot of reconciling to do between me and the cultures that I was representing, because I didn't love them all wholly, and I didn't want them all completely. I wanted pieces of them that felt good in me, that when shoved all together felt like would stay together. Because if I took them all wholly, they would just all reject each other, and then I would be nothing again. So there was a lot of reconciling, for sure.
Question for you though, like how were you? 'Cause I talk about my own personal experiences, but it's just literally had nothing to do with my family. Like I had to find it on my own. Like, were you looking for acceptance, or you just had to accept your own truth and be okay with that until you found the comfortability around, or I guess the comfortability with the people around you?
No, I mean, for me, it was all about acceptance. I kept looking at the world and saying, okay, you give me the terms of your acceptance, and I will sever and separate any part of me that you don't like in order to agree to those terms. And I did that for a really long fucking time, until again, you end up being this not self. You end up being this like this shadow of a person that you think the world loves, but you can't even love because you know it's not you.
Yeah.
And so I had to eventually be like, you know what? I can't live on those terms anymore. I have to be willing to I have to accept myself and be willing to be rejected by some in that game. And you know, I started that process a long time ago, because I needed to accept all of me. I needed to bring it all together, because I was done living according to someone else's moral, visual, aesthetic code. It was murdering me. It was killing me. And I developed a solid coke problem to literally deal with the fact that I was like a shadow human, because I was like, I need to not feel.
Yeah.
Really, I was jotting notes down as you were talking, Sohail, but the idea of defining myself through how you see me, right? Like that's a pretty gnarly trap. And I think the idea of reconciling like my culture with my personal identity, I wouldn't, I have been largely unconscious of my relationship to my culture. I think individually in my very, very white family, we tied our culture to, oh, we're from Ireland and we're from Germany. And being more proud of our Irish roots because we were like rebels in the potato famine. But very, very aware over time, and I believe it's a lot of developing language, but I'm very aware now of how much I didn't have to think about my culture, because my culture was the reference point for how other cultures were defined to me or in our society.
Yeah.
A lot of what like pieces and parts of what you all are saying do resonate in my like cis femaleness. And when I was a kid, really little kid, I didn't want to be a girl. I didn't want to be a girl because I saw what womanhood meant. And I, all around me, it was, you can't do that because you're a girl, or, I mean, at like 8 years old, going to a dance, and the mother who was taking a bunch of us to dance was like, girls, close your knees. Girls don't get to sit like that. Right. And just all these restrictions about like, you can't put yourself out there in a way that men will do something bad. Like it's your responsibility. Right. So all this responsibility is what I'm getting at. I'm doing a poor job of it, but all this responsibility about being a girl and a woman. And I was like, I just want to be that. Like, I want to get to do everything boys get to do.
Right.
Yeah. In learning early on that being a girl meant being weak. And so I started to figure out how to position myself as strong, and very much in the definition of what men consider strength. And so it's not the same. It's such a myopic facet of the threads that we're discussing. But I do think having that experience and having thought through it, and how much it has shaped everything in my life, has been what makes me, it's the basis for empathy and for being able to even consider other people's broader, much more impactful and visceral experience with otherness and the schism it can create potentially within yourself.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully shared. I feel like you guys could have an entire episode on sort of the awakening of femininity and its connection to masculinity, because if you think about it in a degendered way, there are energies that we all need to have, right? It's energies that make us whole. But this whole dialogue around the heart is very much a feminine space. It is the feminine energies, the receptive space, and how to find power in that. You know, and not in the typical male masculine concept of power, but the evolution of the definition of power to include that. Like that's a whole show, y'all.
That's a great point. I mean, I don't even know where to begin, but I appreciate you all sharing, such deep personal stories. Yeah. And, I found a lot of like sort of shared experiences with some of the things that, you've all said. I mean, Erwin, I kind of felt the same growing up as like Latino. I'm pretty light for a Latino person, especially people around my family. And I always never really felt like I fit in. So it was always like, my Spanish wasn't that great. I didn't act a certain way. But, kind of learning how to reconcile with that was, a difficult thing to, kind of face, come, face to face with like, all right, I don't really fit in with that group, but then can I still be happy with who I am and still be proud of like, my ancestry? And I still think there's a lot of, things I still need to do with that. There's, I'm sure, a lot of history I still need to kind of get in touch with. And, it's a path I'm currently going down on. But, what Jody mentioned, I thought it was like really interesting that there's another aspect of what we've, I guess, kind of experienced as men lately with the whole Me Too movement. It's like we need to kind of realize that, you know, sure, as men, it's easy to kind of ignore these issues that some women face when it comes to, like, you know, being assaulted and this and that. And I guess that's another thing that we as men need to be able to reconcile with, you know, like, we're privileged enough that, you know, we're born a certain gender, so we don't have to face some of those experiences or have some of those daily fears. But then how do we come to terms with that? And then how do we find a role that we can play to help support that group and help elevate those voices? I don't know, you know, like, we're all delving into really deep conversations and larger topics, but, you know, I think just kind of listening to you all talk, you know, it started making me think about that as well. And, you know, maybe that's something else I can do better at, just in my daily life.
I super appreciate you saying that, because I think that's making me realize that, one, it's important to acknowledge that, like, the cumulative buildup of the past 4 years, right? And it's been a huge amplification, it feels like, of all the things. And for me personally, again, with so much privilege and a very myopic understanding of culture, the Me Too movement was for me this huge floodgate of, oh my God, there are words now for all of these things I've experienced and felt and have had so much pain and anger and frustration around. And oh my God, it's not just that there are words, there are conversations happening. And in that moment, being really frustrated and disappointed in not hearing more from my cis white male friends on the topic, and encountering a lot of resistance and I mean, fueled probably by shame, but also a little bit of unconsciousness, and in, like, rapid fire trying to figure out how to unweave that and break in, and I think that also set the stage for, like, there was a moment where I was being a jerk online and, like, being all self-righteous, and got called out for it, and by a Black man. And we had a really great one-on-one. I was like, man, would you be willing to just talk with me? Because I have all these thoughts and feelings, and I want to hear all of your thoughts and feelings. And we had this wonderful connection, which was an agreement to have a conversation. And he reflected something to me that I had never considered, right? Which was, like, white women have had their voices for a while. Like, don't kid yourself. And white women have allied themselves with white men because it's been easier than allying yourself with other oppressed communities. And that was a doozy. And I was like, shit, I think I read a headline like that the other day. I better go back and read that. And that was a huge shift in my perspective around, fuck, that's super true. It's been so much easier for me to be like, here's my experience here's my experience of oppression. And I will be very loud about it now that I have words for it and people are listening. And all of a sudden I was like, oh man, this entire time I have not been aligning myself with other oppressed communities because the people in power have shown me, like, what it means to be allied with oppressed communities. And that was, I mean, I'm still chewing on it, frankly. Like, I don't claim to have some, like, I don't know, still working on it. But it was a really powerful positioning. And to be fair, at the end of our conversation, he was like, I also hear your voice too. I was like, thanks, man, that's quick.
I think that's so real as you're speaking it out loud. It's like, it resonates with me because, like, one, I never talk about my sexuality unless you actually know me. And when I talk about my sexuality, it's just like, if you know me, I'm a very hyper masculine. I have very hyper masculine energy by nature. And for the most part, like I'm not straight, but I'm not gay. And so because I was like, I consider myself now the new term pansexual, it's like I had to classify myself as gay or bisexual just to uphold this like level of respect of like, see me as this window, you know what I mean? Like that I'm not just a straight Black woman. You know what I mean? I had to be like, even in high school, I was wearing like boxer shorts. Like you couldn't even see me wearing like regular like thongs or underwear. I wore boxers to state my own dominance because like I'm equal in some sort. You know what I mean? Like I find women attractive, or I explore this other side of me, this masculine side of me that's not socially accepted. So I felt like I had to be that, you know what I mean? And that's what they classified as gay. And even I remember growing up, my mom was like, I'm waiting for you to come out of the closet. And like everyone in high school just assumed I was gay. And I'm like, I like both, you know, but to be accepted, I had to become this hyper masculine person when I felt like it was just already who I was, unexplained, like without definition. And I had to dress it. I had to, you know, exude it for other people to accept me as this person. And a lot of it does stem from being a woman whose voice isn't necessarily heard. You know what I mean? Like, how do I make myself as dominant as you? And I just, when you said that, it brought up a lot of like, I never really classify who I am sexually or like as a woman. I just like, oh, like being Black is enough, but being a Black pansexual, if I have to like classify it, or just even like being a woman, it's just this whole realm of other things that I have to consider in my like identity. Yeah.
Huge. I feel like this aligning with like what you're both talking about is like this aligning with what we consider to be like the dominant accepted like more the dominant accepted thing is in some ways like this social contract like hiding in the background that we all kind of accepted. That was like there is a certain archetype and model of what it was accepted in this world, and not only is accepted but will win, but will succeed. And in order to win and succeed, you have to as closely identify and make yourself become that model and archetype, because if you don't, you won't win and you won't get and you won't succeed. And in that, there's a huge like violence to self, because you basically strip away all these parts of you that doesn't align to this dominant model. And well, then where's all the magic that makes you you, you know, that makes you unique?
Totally. I feel like, you know, we're on the topic of kind of these dominant societal mores. As human beings on this planet, I feel like everyone, the moment that we all kind of find our own personal identity is the moment we challenge those things that society expects us to be, you know, and really just own everything about us fully. And I think Sohail and everyone else here has talked about that a lot, is just we're an amalgamation of so many different things. And I think once we actually finally come into those and come to terms with those, and that's when we own our identity. So it's interesting to see that, you know, through you all being vulnerable and sharing your stories. I don't know, it's definitely eye-opening for me, just to know that, you know, everyone just has their own things they're going through. And yeah, I mean, going back to the idea of optimism, like it makes me optimistic that and people are just sharing their stories, and I think it's beautiful.
Yeah. I think also there's this element of like what I call like identity innovation, which is the synthesis and the creation of a you that is this amalgamation of all these unique aspects of who you are that come together in a way that only you can. And for me, that's the connection between like this time and the like the outer game and the inner game. The inner game is that how do I like bring together all these disparate parts of me that have been discarded through this process of trying to fit in and be part of this kind of world. and be like, no, I'm bringing you all back together because you're all my special little snowflakes that's making one like dramatically amazing, beautiful snowflake. And that is the being that then is going out into the world to stand and saying, I am here and I am unique and I have an expression and I shine my light in a way that only I can. And that is basically how change is happening in the world. And that's what makes, that was what gives me hope about the new world. Is we kind of talked about this in the DEI collective, is like, I want to see a world where we feel safe with difference,
Mhm.
not with sameness.
Yeah, because that's, sameness is the root of othering, right? And I mean, I don't know. I say right. I don't know. I just said that.
Yeah.
I don't
Deep. I like it.
Mic drop.
I'm good. I'll stop then. No, it's wild, the idea of understanding that. I've just been reading a lot about whiteness as a concept and how it hasn't even ever been addressed as a thing, because most things in like traditional schooling, and I would say most media, and certainly in my own like work experience and conversationally, right? People say, I met a guy. And I should say, white people will say, I met a guy. And then they'll say, I met a black guy, right? They don't like, there's this,
Mm-hmm.
and just even like starting to learn language like that to identify it and then be able to identify it with other folks when they do it. I don't know exactly where I'm going with that. Trying to tie it back to the idea of being not just okay, but celebrating difference and acknowledging that really everybody is different. And that there is perhaps some like, there's some deep intrinsic gravitation toward clumping and finding sameness, because like in our lizard brain, there's some like safety in being able to judge and make decisions around like what is like me and feels safe and secure. But our brains have evolved, like we're more sophisticated than that. And I'm going to tie it back to the heart. Like perhaps it's our hearts that have not yet evolved enough to understand, to like override that in our brain and say like, that's not a useful skill right now.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, you think about it, like that goes back to tribal dynamics, right? Like back in the day, if you're walking through the bush and you come across another human, like immediately you're scanning to what extent they resemble you. And if they look similar to you, then chances are you'll be fine. But if they don't, like an axe or like an arrow is like going to come hurtling at your head. And that has happened for thousands and thousands of years. So in some ways, we're still playing that out, even though that is not actually the world anymore.
Jody brought up a great point with her debate, online. Like, how do we do a better job of acknowledging, there's so many different factors that make us who we are. And there's obviously certain causes that some of us might care more about just because, of our background or orientation or, so on and so forth. How do we ensure that all the voices are being heard? And, it's not about like making sure like, oh yeah, my cause is more important than yours, Because I think at that point, when we start fighting against each other, then it's kind of going backwards again. Anyway, maybe a topic for another day, but it's good to keep in mind.
I think, and I don't want to dive too deeply into business communication, but it is a business communication thing that I've learned to say, like the trying framing things in and, right? And so it's a great question. How do we uplift multiple, myriad voices and experiences, and challenge the idea that we can only handle so much at one time. Which makes me think, as I'm saying that out loud, like the unifying factor, right, is how do we celebrate and uplift humans and acknowledge that everyone has a different experience. And well, I don't know.
No, I think I see where you're going, because I think there's this understanding that like the root of all of these movements is the dismantling of something that is old, that has marginalized groups, has separated us, has said that these parts are worthy and these parts are not worthy. And so I think anywhere where we see that kind of old paradigm, and we're like, you know what, I don't want that anymore. I want to activate that new paradigm there, and I want to pull that old belief system up from the roots in that world, whether it's in a world of color or whether it's world of gender or sexual orientation or whatever it is. That's a worthy fight, and the root is all the same, which is let's move to a more equitable, loving world where we can all coexist with our uniqueness, not because of our sameness.
I was gonna say, like, I felt like it starts with equity, and like it wasn't until like 2 days ago, or I'm just speaking loosely, but like it wasn't until we created this program that I realized how strong equity is when it comes to just like not only in the workplace but like socially. And when we say like the difference between Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter, it's not saying that like brown lives doesn't matter or whatever. It's like, what do Black people need right now to kind of build themselves up to feel as acknowledged as these other cultures? And then from there, we can keep growing. And when it comes to what we're trying to address or what we're trying to acknowledge is like, it's 400 plus years of oppression. And like that itself, being an American, is something that I personally want to focus on. It's like, how do we break that mold so I can confidently say that I can speak for other cultures. I can confidently carry the weight of understanding like the things like the Holocaust or something, things that I've already put above myself as a Black woman. I put other people's issues and other people's oppressions above my own. It's like, how can I feel safe enough to be like, okay, but like slavery is kind of there, you know? And I feel like once we get there, we can continue to build. But it starts with the equity of like giving other people what they need to kind of weigh out to move forward.
Yeah. Beautifully put.
Yeah. And to be more tactical, Brian, because I think there's a huge vacuum in total around conversational skills, right? Like communication is the hardest thing. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the most powerful, like radical actions that an individual can take right now is taking the time and patience and communication skills to have one-on-one conversations with folks. Mm-hmm. And I mean, across the board, but in particular, folks who are still unconscious to some extent, and even people who are ignorant. And at least I feel like that's the thing that as a white person is one of the most impactful things that I can be doing, is trying to speak to specifically other white people in a way where I am intentionally trying to open a conversation that's very uncomfortable and fraught with fear, because people are so afraid of being called a racist or being made to feel shame around white people's culture. And so I think the conversation, like, it was such a huge unlocking moment for me, because that one man took the time to have a 1 hour conversation with me. And I'm really grateful for it. And I think that is one way we start to do it. We start to take the time to have conversations like these. I'm sure this is like a master's course in 2 hours, you know, of
Yeah.
on everything. But for, I don't know, that's my perspective. I think that is a very impactful thing we can do. And it requires a lot of energy and a lot of intention.
Totally. I mean, we've talked a lot about that in like the sort of the D&I collective. Was inclusion is the presence of intimacy and a sense of belonging, and how intimacy will, you know, we can focus on like the sanitization of language so I don't offend you, or we have intimacy in place where even if you say something fucked up, like we can actually talk about it and be like, look, let me explain to you why what you said hurt me, and let me understand why you said it from the way you said it. So, you know, I'm way more pro intimacy and let's have the conversation than the sanitization of language that says, here are all the words you can't say in order to create an inclusive workspace. I mean, sure, there's a place for that, but it's not to replace the intimacy that enables the conversation, which enables change.
100%.
100.
Which I would say, like, intimacy is one of the things, intimacy and vulnerability, not humans general strong, like in mass, right? Our society has kind of taught us out of that.
Yeah.
So it's a relearning of that as an actual skill to be able to tap into it.
Absolutely. And you know how you learn it? I was in one of my workshops. One of my students in the course came up with this like, she broke down the word intimacy into me I see.
Love that.
Into me I see. And so the whole point of intimacy is the external intimacy you want to have is directly related to the internal intimacy you have with yourself. You can't go deeper outside of yourself than the depth through which you've gone inside yourself. So you want to have intimacy of depth outside of yourself. You want to have emotional safety outside of yourself. Well, then start to create that inside of yourself.
Fuck it up, Sohail.
I got like a 3-course meal in front of me. I'm just going to be chewing on it for weeks. Like,
but yeah, that's real, as Jojo would say.
If I could just say something, and it's directed towards Erwin, being a Black man and hearing kind of your point of view with the work that you're doing right now, and kind of hearing how you're a little bit passive about it, like, how do you feel about the progress and change that you've made personally?
How do I feel about it?
Yeah.
That's a hard question. I don't know. I mean, I'm proud. I'm happy about it. Like, yeah, I'm happy about it. It's humbling that people like bought the shirt to the point where I can donate 10K to 6 organizations each and still have more to donate. And now looking at actually buying. So my sister works at like an inner city school in Sandusky, and her kids had to go home. A lot of those kids don't have good internet. So now I'm talking with her about possibly paying monthly bills so that people can actually have internet in their homes, and then buying laptops or something, like cheap laptops for at least like kids in one of the classes. So for me, it's just, I don't know. This is after seeing what my parents did when I was growing up, and the fact that they built homes in the inner city, and then my grandparents on one side owned exterminating, my grandparents on the other side owned landscaping, and they built an ecosystem of care around these different homes and new homeowners within the inner city. To me, it just seems like something it seems like like you were saying, I was built for this. This is everything prepared me for this moment, from me learning the world of branding and learning how to create an unphysical space of belonging, which is what a brand is at the end of the day. Like Nike is an unphysical space where people feel like they belong, and then they have products that strengthen that sense of belonging. So to me, learning that has now transitioned into what my parents put into me through doing community service every single week. And I hated that shit when I was young, to looking at them building things within the community and building spaces. So for me, this just seems like where I'm supposed to be. I guess that's why I'm kind of like nonchalant about it. It literally feels like where I'm supposed to be. And it is amazing, and it feels great to donate support. But I think like Sohail and I were having a conversation one time where it's like, I still feel like I'm in a constant state of becoming. So that's also why I'm just like, this is just part of the process and it's not the end. So I also can't rest in feeling only proud. I'm looking at like, how do I continue? What else can I do? On top of like working with friends to launch restaurants and spaces within like also underrepresented community here in San Diego, and looking at how that can actually contrast the traditional ways of gentrification to help like actually build pride within one's neighborhood, to help people reinvest into the neighborhood. So to me, it's just all of these things and all of these projects to me are about creating safe space for conversation and belonging. And I just want to keep doing it. I guess that's how I feel. It was like a proof point to say like, this is the right direction and this is the right thing to be doing. People are buying it, but they're not just buying it for me. They're actually donating money. That's all the t-shirt is. And they happen to be getting the t-shirt. So it gave me more pride in my own voice. And that's even worked itself out at work, where I begin to lean back into just speaking more emotionally and talking from my heart and presenting from my heart, as opposed to trying to like be the perfect creative director. And like more so lead lead with my why, which is to put empathy into the world and to create for community, which is why I'll never get tired of something like a Crafted. I'll never get tired of making t-shirts, because for me, at the end of the day, that's all community based, right? And so for me, it's like worked itself out in the office, and it's also continuing to work itself out and develop and evolve outside of the office. So yeah, I'm happy. I guess that's it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm happy with it.
Erwin, if you remember, part of our becoming conversation was also about the taking it in, like being celebrated, accepting the love that's coming at you, because that love you can use in order to do more. But the accepting of it gives you more to give.
I would agree with that. Because honestly, like seeing people purchase dirt and then like constantly getting reached out to and people just saying like, this is good work, like that does give me energy to continue doing it.
Yep.
But again, I'm not making any money on the shirts, and I'm spending hours and hours and hours not designing them, but folding them and shipping them, and like messing up on shipments, learning the process of fulfillment, and then getting yelled at by some people saying, where the hell is my shirt? So it's like going through these like mental ups and downs. And then it also just takes a lot of time from relationships that I also should be dedicating time to. So to me, it's like there's like this level of sacrifice, and I'm not making any money, but then those moments where people are like, thank you, this is amazing, or even speaking to some of the organizations and them saying how important it is to get a 10K donation all at once. To me, that makes it worth it, and that makes me want to keep going. Yeah. So you're right, like being able to accept it, which is still weird for me. I kind of just want to move through the world without that.
No.
But being able to accept it, yes, it is important, to your point of like, not in a way of building my ego, but in a way of like little micro case studies that it's working.
Yeah.
That it's important.
Yep.
And to like circle back to the beginning of acknowledging your own wins, that's like, no, you're not out there protesting, but you are doing something that you feel passionate about and that people are receiving and accepting and promoting. And, you know, I tell you all the time, I'm a huge advocate of what you're doing. And even in my own successes, and you build me up in a way where you're just like, no, you lead or you talk, and I'm just like, no, I'm just like this little Black woman. Like you kind of push me and challenge me in that way. Like I continue to push you and challenge you into acknowledging, you know, who you are and what you do for the culture, not even in the Black community, but just in the community of San Diego. Period. You know.
10,000%. I'm so inspired.
Also, there's a lot of like additional kind of power, but also power is the wrong word. Well, it's powerful for people to witness you express what you just expressed.
Yeah.
Because we are also oftentimes in our society either taught that like success looks like ego and arrogance, and so humility is also a value, and we often shrug off things that we do or say, or we deflect and oh no, or you know, I like your hat, oh I got it, it's just, it was only $2. Like we're just like, we do these weird things.
Exactly.
But there's so much power. I'm realizing this more and more as I get older, and I've had people reflect to me like, oh, I just assume you have your shit together. And I'm like, no, I'm a mess, man. Like, and it's allowing people to see your true intimacy and vulnerability, and that it's okay to be proud. In that there's a way to experience that and speak about it in a way that isn't negative, or I mean, in fact, it's heartening and inspiring. And I think there's a lot of power in that as well, especially like it's a very unintentional way of modeling a really healthy self-awareness and experience of self, I think. So, you know, please keep doing that.
Yeah. This whole episode, he's like so uncomfortable every time we just compliment him. Like, he can't take it.
But we have almost reached our 2-hour mark, and
Yeah.
Eric, I wanted to see if anyone had made any comments or had any questions.
Yeah. We have one question from our very, very active fan, Matt Surwich from Basic.
Hey.
Do you consider hope to be action? And I think that's a totally valid question. You know, what is the relationship between hope and initiative and actually seeing progress, I suppose?
Yeah, I actually think action can build hope. And you need hope in order to action. Chicken or the egg?
I guess hope can be kind of like a fuel, right? Because if you're disenfranchised, it's very easy to go down that path where you just don't want to do anything because you just kind of give up. I think everyone needs a little bit of hope to help push them forward.
And to kind of pick at that sentence though, is hope and action. So, and I'm going to read into it a little bit, but like the having hope as is it in and of itself an action? And I, off the cuff, say no. But I don't know why. Because I do know why. Because I immediately project into a place where someone's like, well, thoughts and prayers, or I have hope for you. And, and so having hope itself, maybe is in some way, shape, or form an action, I would posit that it is, it's not an active action, if that makes sense. I don't know.
I was gonna say, for me, depending on like what type of hope it is, so I feel like those are like passive hopes, where it's just kind of like niceties to be like, yeah, I had hope for you, but whatever. But I think like the hope that I feel right now feels like an action because it leads to more action, and it took work to get to a point of feeling the hope, especially when you see either people are constantly like downtrodden and all that stuff. So I think it depends culturally, like where you are in a space, because that just the simple thing of hope can be just like a simple thing of like what love is, and it takes work to get there. So to me, like, I think it, like if it's passive hope, no, that's not an action. But if it's like you truly feel hope in a way that you see a brighter future and you have a level of optimism that of course is not demeaning or like pushing off like everything that's going on, that does take a level of like mental work. And therefore for me, that's action. And then the action is like the proof of that hope, or the action is the result of the hope. And then you get more hope by people like reacting to your action. So I think it is like in this case or in this scenario, like for me, I feel like the hope that I've felt on like the weekend after the week of the 25th, I feel like that hope was like a space of action because I was legit paralyzed throughout the week. One, because like we're working in an industry where you have to like put on a face, you have to talk, you're presenting all of the time. And in those presentations, you can't be like, look, somebody just got killed. This shit is hard. I don't want to present right now. Like, let's talk about some real stuff. You can't do that. You have to still like pull those feelings in and like speak. But I felt truly paralyzed. And then to get to a point of hope took like mental exercise and mental work.
Yeah.
I think something to acknowledge, and like I constantly forget it, and my boyfriend keeps bringing it up to me, is the power of manifestation. And to just, when I think of hope, it's like speaking of it just out loud and giving yourself positive affirmations that, like, even though it might seem unbelievable, just speaking positive light out there or for yourself and for others can bring positive results. So to build off of that, just manifesting what you want will make it happen for you because you believe in yourself, you know. And coming from a place of doubt a lot, just saying little manifestations or just giving myself the option of that possibility and speaking it, or someone speaking it to me, whether they actually believe it or not, manifest it within myself that I can actually do it.
Totally. It's
Also,
the mind and the heart, right? It's like using your heart full of hope and then your mind with the solutions to actually action on them. So it goes
Perfect.
back to what we just talked about. Yeah.
I was gonna say I don't want to like belittle the I gotta use the restroom.
There it is.
That's how we end it.
So it's like it's
That's how we always end it.
Just your mind telling you that you have to use the restroom.
Yeah, I was gonna say y'all can keep talking. I
The
just
heart
gotta,
wants to stay, but the mind's gotta go.
But I'm glad to pass the time. All right. Well,
All right.
thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
for
everyone.
joining us.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thank
like Erwin
you. Thanks for
Ryan.
having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Yeah,
This
Sam.
has probably
It's great,
been the
you know.
most. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, please, go ahead.
I was gonna say this has just been the most inspiring conversation. I mean, we've had a lot of them, but every week I just feel so energized. So thanks for joining us, guys.
No, I
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for
appreciate it. Thanks for having.
Outside of this conversation, a lot of like it will continue, and I plan on bringing this more with my friends and even with them myself. So I appreciate you guys joining the conversation. Thank you.
And thanks for having us. It's great to talk to some of you for the first time too. So
Yeah. More of it.
I also want to acknowledge that Sohail just like low-key introduced new vocabulary on the call that we all immediately adopted. Like, you crack shit open in real time.
It's wild.
No,
Like, did you do your heart work today? They're like, what? Your fucking heart work. Did you do that?
put that down. Hard work. Yeah.
You get tough with JoJo, you know.
Yeah, exactly. I'm all about it.
You're
Awesome.
right.
Thank you. I appreciate
All right, well, happy Friday, everyone.
that. Bye. Happy Friday.
All right.
Friday.
Bye.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.